Nobody at that dinner table expected your name to come up. The conversation had been ordinary only seconds before: quiet laughter, familiar stories, glasses being filled, plates being passed from one person to another. Your soulmate was sitting there, trying to look completely normal, trying to convince everyone that life had moved forward exactly the way it was supposed to. But then someone at the table suddenly leaned forward and asked a question that changed the entire atmosphere. Whatever happened to the person you once cared about so deeply? And without warning, every voice disappeared. Listen carefully, because what happened next was not the reaction anyone expected. Your soulmate did not laugh it off. They did not change the subject. They did not pretend they had forgotten you. Instead, their hands stopped halfway toward their glass, their expression changed, and for several long seconds they simply stared down at the table. Someone sitting nearby immediately noticed. Another person tried to break the silence with a nervous smile, but it was too late. Your name had opened a door your soulmate had spent a very long time trying to keep closed. The person who asked about you had no idea how deeply that question would hit. They had simply remembered hearing about you years ago. Maybe they had seen an old picture. Maybe someone in the family had once mentioned how different your soulmate used to be when you were still part of their life. Whatever the reason, they asked innocently, "Did you two ever speak again?" That second question made the silence even heavier. Your soulmate finally looked up. And what they said surprised everyone. They quietly answered, "No, but that doesn't mean I stopped thinking about them." The entire table changed. Someone lowered their fork. Someone else looked directly at your soulmate as if they had just heard a confession that had been hidden for years. Because this was not how your soulmate usually spoke about the past. Whenever someone came close to mentioning you before, they would avoid the subject, give a short answer, or pretend that chapter had already ended. But tonight was different. Something inside them was tired of pretending. The person across the table asked, "Then why didn't you go back?" Your soulmate looked uncomfortable. Their eyes moved toward someone else sitting at the table, someone who seemed to know more than they were saying. That tiny glance did not go unnoticed. Suddenly, this was no longer a casual conversation. There was history sitting at that table. There were decisions that had never been explained. There were words that had been swallowed because certain people believed silence was easier than truth. Your soulmate took a slow breath and said, "Because I thought they didn't want me anymore." That sentence landed harder than anyone expected. Because someone at that dinner table knew that was not the whole story. They knew there had been misunderstandings. They knew things had been said behind closed doors. They knew your soulmate had been given a version of the story that may never have matched what was truly inside your heart. And now, for the first time, the pieces were beginning to move. Don't skip what comes next, because the person who originally asked about you suddenly became serious. They looked at your soulmate and said, "Are you sure that's what really happened?" Your soulmate froze. "Why are you asking me that?" The person hesitated. Everyone could feel that something was about to come out. Then came the words nobody expected. Because I heard a very different story about why you two separated. Your soulmate's face changed instantly. The dinner was forgotten. Nobody cared about the food anymore. Your soulmate leaned forward and asked, "What story?" But the person did not answer immediately. Instead, they looked toward another family member at the table, the same person your soulmate had glanced at only moments earlier. That look said everything. There was something hidden here. Something your soulmate had never been told. And suddenly your soulmate understood that this conversation was not happening by accident anymore. They turned toward that family member and asked, "What do you know?" No answer. "Tell me." Still silence. Your soulmate's voice became emotional. "All these years, I believed they walked away because they stopped loving me. If that wasn't true, I need to know now." The room became painfully quiet. And then the family member finally spoke. They admitted that during the most difficult period of your relationship, people around your soulmate had become afraid of where the connection was going. Some believed the relationship was too intense. Others believed your soulmate needed a different future. Advice became pressure. Pressure became interference. And somewhere between all of it, two people who should have been speaking directly to each other began receiving information through everyone except each other. Your soulmate listened without interrupting. Then came the confession that hurt the most. There had been a moment when your soulmate almost contacted you. They had written something. They had wanted to ask whether there was still a chance. But before they could send it, someone convinced them that you had already moved on and that reaching out would only embarrass them. Your soulmate looked devastated. "Who told you that?" Someone asked. They answered quietly, "Someone I trusted." That was when another person at the table said something that completely changed the direction of the evening. "But I saw them after everything happened." Your soulmate looked up immediately. "You saw who?" The answer came softly. "You." For a moment, your soulmate seemed unable to process what they had just heard. The person explained that they had crossed paths with you long after the separation. They remembered your expression when your soulmate's name came up. They remembered that you did not sound like someone who had simply forgotten everything. There was still pain there. There were still unanswered questions. Your soulmate whispered, "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Nobody had a good answer. And that was the moment your soulmate stopped protecting everyone else's version of the story. They pushed their chair slightly away from the table and said, "I spent all this time believing I wasn't wanted. I made decisions because I thought there was nothing left to return to. And now you're telling me nobody actually knew what they felt?" The person across from them answered, "Maybe you should have asked them yourself." Those words stayed in the room. Maybe you should have asked them yourself. Your soulmate became silent again, but this silence was different. It was no longer the silence of someone trying to bury the past. It was the silence of someone realizing the past might have been built on incomplete information. Then someone asked the question everyone was now thinking. If you were standing outside that door right now, what would you say? Your soulmate did not hesitate this time. Their eyes became emotional, and they answered. I would ask them to sit down with me once. Just once. No family. No friends. No opinions. No old stories. Just the two of us telling each other what actually happened. Nobody expected that answer. But your soulmate was not finished. They continued, and if they told me they truly stopped caring, I would finally accept it. But if they told me they were waiting for me to understand something I never understood, then I would have to question every decision I made after losing them. That confession changed the dinner completely. Because everyone at that table suddenly realized something. Your soulmate had never truly received closure. They had received explanations. They had received assumptions. They had received other people's interpretations. But they had never received the truth directly from you. And now your name had awakened every question they thought they had buried. Later that evening, after dinner was over and everyone began leaving the table, your soulmate remained behind. Someone quietly approached and asked, "Are you okay?" Your soulmate gave a small, broken smile. "No. But maybe I needed this." Then they pulled out their phone. For several seconds, they stared at the screen. Your name was not forgotten. Your story was not emotionally empty. And despite everything that had happened, there was still one question your soulmate could no longer ignore. What if the ending they accepted was never the real ending? Their finger hovered over the screen. They wanted to search for you. They wanted to know where life had taken you. They wanted to know whether contacting you would reopen an old wound, or finally close one that had never healed properly. But just before your soulmate could make that decision, the person who had first asked about you returned to the room. And this time, they were holding something. Something they had deliberately waited until everyone else left to reveal. They placed it beside your soulmate and quietly said, "Before you decide whether to contact them, there's one more thing about you that you need to know." Your soulmate looked down. And the moment they realized what had been placed in front of them, every assumption they had carried about your love story began to fall apart. Your soulmate stared at what had been placed on the table, but for several seconds, they could not bring themselves to touch it. It was an old envelope. Nothing expensive, nothing dramatic from the outside, but there was something written across the front that immediately changed their expression. Their name was there. And underneath it were a few words that made their heart pound. "This was supposed to reach you a long time ago." Your soulmate slowly looked up. "Where did you get this?" The person standing across from them hesitated before answering. "I've had it longer than I should have." That answer was enough to make your soulmate stand up. "What do you mean you've had it?" The person took a breath. "I didn't know what to do with it. At the time, everyone was telling me that giving it to you would only make things worse. You were already hurting. People thought you needed to move forward. So I listened. Your soulmate's eyes immediately filled with disbelief. You listened to them? I thought I was protecting you. Protecting me from what? The person looked toward the envelope. From going back to you. Those words cut through the room. Your soulmate slowly sat back down. Their hands were trembling now. All those years they had believed you had chosen silence. They had believed you never fought for the relationship. They had believed that when everything fell apart, you simply allowed them to disappear from your life. But now an envelope was sitting in front of them that suggested something completely different. Don't skip this moment, because what happened next was the first time your soulmate truly began questioning the story they had been living with for years. They picked up the envelope carefully. It had already been opened. That detail immediately caught their attention. Why is this open? No answer. Your soulmate looked directly at the person. You read it? The person lowered their eyes. Yes. The disappointment on your soulmate's face was immediate. You read something meant for me. And then decided I shouldn't see it? I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that if you read it, you would go looking for them. Your soulmate said nothing. Because suddenly everything made sense. The interference. The warnings. The pressure to move forward. The constant insistence that you were no longer thinking about them. People had not simply been offering advice. At least one person had actively made a decision on your soulmate's behalf. Your soulmate slowly removed the folded pages from the envelope. The paper looked old. The folds had softened with time. And as your soulmate began reading, their expression changed line by line. The message was not filled with anger. It was not blaming them. It was not asking them to feel guilty. Instead, it explained something your soulmate had never understood. You had not disappeared because you stopped caring. You had stepped away because everything around the relationship had become so complicated that you no longer knew whether reaching out would bring peace or create even more pain. You had been waiting for one clear sign that your soulmate still wanted the conversation. And your soulmate had been waiting for exactly the same thing from you. Two people. Both waiting. Both hurting. Both believing the other person had already chosen to walk away. Your soulmate stopped reading. Their eyes closed. Then came the question. When did this arrive? The person gave the date. Your soulmate immediately looked up. Because they remembered that period perfectly. That was the exact time they had been struggling most. The exact time they had almost reached out. The exact time they had been told that contacting you would be pointless because you had supposedly moved on. Your soulmate whispered, "If I had received this then." They could not finish the sentence. The person across from them said quietly, "I know." No. You don't know. Your soulmate's voice broke. You don't know what decisions I made because I thought there was nothing left. You don't know how many nights I convinced myself that I meant nothing to them anymore. You don't know how hard I worked to stop thinking about someone I never actually wanted to forget. The person had no defense. Your soulmate continued reading. Then suddenly they reached a line that made them stop completely. They read it twice. Then a third time. The person across from them knew exactly which line they had reached. Your soulmate looked up. You knew about this too? The person nodded. That line explained that before walking away completely, you had tried to find another way to get a message through. Not once. More than once. But circumstances, misunderstandings, and other people's involvement had repeatedly prevented the two of you from having the conversation you actually needed. Your soulmate put the letter down. So when everyone told me they never tried. Silence. When everyone told me I was the only one still holding on. Silence again. That wasn't true? The person finally answered. No. Your soulmate leaned back in the chair as though the entire room had shifted beneath them. For years, they had carried one painful belief: you had chosen life without them. Now they were discovering that belief might never have been true. And the realization hurt more than the original separation. Because heartbreak is painful. But discovering that heartbreak may have been avoidable creates a completely different kind of pain. Your soulmate stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the night was quiet. Inside, their mind was racing through years of memories. Every moment they had missed you. Every time they almost searched your name. Every time they wondered whether you ever remembered them. Every time someone told them, "Leave the past alone." Now those words felt different. Because perhaps the past had never been properly understood in the first place. The person behind them finally said, "There's something else." Your soulmate turned around sharply. What else could there possibly be? The answer came slowly. That letter isn't the reason I asked about you at dinner tonight. Your soulmate froze. What? I already knew about the letter. I could have given it to you privately anytime. But something happened recently. Your soulmate stepped closer. What happened? The person hesitated. That I heard something about you. Your soulmate's entire expression changed. What did you hear? It made me realize keeping this letter from you any longer would be wrong. Your soulmate immediately asked the question they had been afraid to ask all evening. Are they okay? The speed of that question surprised even the person standing there. There was no hesitation. No pretending. Your soulmate's first instinct was concern for you. The person nodded. As far as I know, yes. Your soulmate exhaled. But the relief lasted only a moment. Then what did you hear? The person reached into their pocket and pulled out their phone. There was a conversation a few days ago. Your name came up. My name? Yes. With them? The person nodded. Your soulmate's eyes widened. What did they say? The phone was placed on the table. But before anything was played, the person gave your soulmate a warning. You need to understand something. Whatever you hear, don't react immediately. Listen until the end. Your soulmate sat down again. The recording began. At first, there were ordinary voices. Then your soulmate heard your name. Their breathing changed. Someone in the recording asked you whether there was one person from your past you wished you could speak to again. There was a pause. A long one. And then came an answer your soulmate had never expected to hear. You mentioned them. Not with bitterness. Not with anger. But with something much heavier. You said there were things you wished had been understood differently. You said sometimes two people can care deeply about each other and still lose each other because fear, timing, pride, and outside voices become louder than the truth. Your soulmate covered their mouth. The recording continued. Then someone asked, if they contacted you today, would you answer? Another pause. Your soulmate leaned closer to the phone. And then came the answer. I don't know what would happen after that conversation. But yes, I would answer. Your soulmate immediately looked away. Their eyes were wet now. Not because they believed everything could suddenly return to the way it was. Not because one conversation could erase years of pain. But because for the first time, they realized the door they thought had been permanently locked might never have been completely closed. The recording ended. Nobody spoke. Finally, your soulmate whispered, "Why are you giving me this now?" The person answered, "Because tonight, when someone asked about you, I watched your face. And I realized everyone has spent too much time deciding what the two of you should feel instead of allowing you to speak for yourselves." That sentence hit deeply. Your soulmate looked down at their phone. Your name was somewhere inside it. Maybe in an old conversation. Maybe in an archived contact. Maybe simply in their memory. But now the possibility of speaking to you no longer felt impossible. Still, fear remained. What if I'm too late? The person replied, "Then you'll finally know. But don't build another 10 years around a question you were too afraid to ask." Your soulmate stared at the screen. They typed your name. Stopped. Deleted it. Typed again. Their heart was fighting with every memory that told them to leave the past alone. Then they remembered the letter. They remembered the recording. They remembered their own confession at dinner. And finally, they made a decision. They were going to contact you. Not to demand another chance. Not to pretend nothing happened. Not to promise some perfect ending. They simply wanted the truth directly from the one person they should have asked years ago. You. But just as your soulmate was about to send the first message, the person beside them suddenly said, "Wait." Your soulmate looked up. "There is one final thing you need to see before you contact them." This time, it was not another letter. It was not another recording. Recently, Your soulmate looked at it once and immediately recognized something in the background. Something connected to a memory only the two of you would understand. Their hands began trembling again. Where was this taken? The person told them. Your soulmate stared at the photograph, completely stunned. Because that location was not random. It was a place tied directly to one of the most important moments in your love story. And suddenly one question became impossible to ignore. Why had you returned there after all these years? Your soulmate looked toward the door, then back at the photograph. And for the first time that night, they were no longer wondering whether they should contact you. They were wondering whether you had been waiting for them to finally discover the truth. It was a photograph taken recently. Your soulmate kept staring at the photograph as though the answer might somehow reveal itself if they looked long enough. That place was impossible to forget. Years ago, before everything became complicated, before outside voices entered the relationship, before silence replaced conversations, the two of you had stood there and spoken about a future neither of you knew how difficult it would become. It was not simply a location. It represented a version of your love story that existed before fear took control. And now, after all these years, you had returned there. Your soulmate looked at the person beside them and asked, "When was this taken?" "Recently." "How recently?" "A few days ago." Your soulmate's eyes widened. Only a few days. That meant this was not some forgotten photograph discovered in an old drawer. You had actually returned to that place while your soulmate was still trying to convince themselves that you had forgotten everything. Why were they there? The person hesitated. "I think you already know." Your soulmate shook their head. "No. I don't want assumptions anymore. That's what destroyed everything the first time. Tell me what you actually know." That sentence mattered. Because something had finally changed inside your soulmate. For years, they had allowed assumptions to fill the spaces where truth should have been. Tonight, they were refusing to do that again. The person sat down beside them. They went there because someone asked them about the past. And apparently, instead of avoiding it, they decided to visit the place where they remembered being happiest with you. Your soulmate lowered their eyes. There was no dramatic celebration. No instant belief that everything would magically become perfect again. There was simply emotion. Deep, quiet emotion. Because sometimes discovering that someone remembered you is more powerful than discovering that they missed you. Memory means something survived. Your soulmate looked again at the photograph. Then they noticed something they had missed before. You were holding something. A small object, something familiar. Your soulmate brought the photograph closer. "No." Their voice almost disappeared. They recognized it. It was connected to a promise from long ago. Something small enough that anyone else would have considered it meaningless, but your soulmate understood immediately. And suddenly the years between you did not feel quite as empty. Your soulmate whispered, "They kept it?" The person answered, "Apparently." That was the moment your soulmate finally broke down. Not loudly. Not dramatically. They simply covered their face and allowed years of suppressed emotion to surface. I thought I was the only one who remembered. Those words carried everything. The loneliness. The regret. The unanswered questions. The night spent wondering whether the connection had meant as much to you as it had meant to them. And now they were realizing something painful but beautiful. Maybe both of you had been remembering the same story from opposite sides of the silence. Don't skip this moment, because your soulmate was about to make the first decision that belonged completely to them. They picked up their phone. This time, nobody stopped them. Nobody offered advice. Nobody told them what you might think. Nobody tried to predict what would happen. Your soulmate opened the message box and began typing. The first message was long. They deleted it. The second message tried to explain everything. They deleted that too. Finally, they wrote something simple. Something honest. Something that did not demand anything from you. I learned something tonight that I should have learned years ago. I don't know where life has taken you, and I don't know whether you want to hear from me. But if you're willing, I would like one honest conversation. No pressure. No expectations. Just the truth we never got to tell each other. Your soulmate stared at the message. Their thumb hovered over the button. Fear returned immediately. What if you ignored it? What if you had changed? What if the memory meant more to them than it did to you? What if contacting you reopened pain that had taken years to survive? But then your soulmate remembered something important. They had already lived with the consequences of silence. They knew what unanswered questions could do. They knew how easily years could disappear while two people waited for certainty that never came. So they pressed send. And suddenly there was nothing left to do except wait. 1 minute passed. Then another. Your soulmate placed the phone face down. They tried not to look. But every few seconds, their eyes returned to it. The person beside them quietly said, "Whatever happens now, at least the decision was yours." Your soulmate nodded. That was true. For the first time, nobody had spoken for you. Nobody had spoken for them. The message belonged only to your soulmate. Several minutes later, the phone vibrated.